If you want to win fantasy football, the most important thing to do is make your own rankings. Do not be beholden to the rankings that they give you, and I don't care which format it is. If it's redraft season-long leagues, if it's best ball like we're talking about today, if it's IDP where you're drafting defensive players, you cannot be beholden to the rankings. Do a little bit of research, invest a little bit of time into this so that you can win and you can make informed decisions. Because frankly, the rankings that you're provided with are not always accurate, right? Everybody said draft Austin Eckler 4th overall last year. That didn't work out. And everyone said pick Dameon Pierce up in the 2nd round. That didn't work out at all. Nobody told you draft Puka Nacua, right? So you have to invest a little bit of time into this. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to look at DraftKings 3rd round rankings. We're going to keep all the same players and just reorder them, even though there's some of them that I would move into different rounds. We're just going to reorder this 3rd round for today. So starting off, I agree with DraftKings on first pick of the 3rd round, Mike Evans. Honestly, I think he should be going in the 2nd round. And there's players like Kyron Williams, Jalen Waddle in the 2nd round that I would fade in favor of Mike Evans because he has been the most consistent fantasy football wide receiver for the last decade, pretty much. I mean, he's constantly finishing top 5, top 10. I mean, he had a phenomenal year last year. There's been no change up in that Bucs offense, really. There's even the added benefit that we don't even have to worry about him and Baker establishing any chemistry because they've already gotten a year to work with each other. So I'm so in on Mike Evans this year, and he should be going in an earlier round, so scoop him up while he is at the edge of this 3rd round right now. I also agree with DraftKings on their 2nd pick of the 3rd round, Cooper Kupp. A player that I probably think should also be going a little bit higher because if you saw in our other videos, we went through the differential between the Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp existence, right? When Kupp is on the field, Puka's targets go down substantially, right? If you look at those first few games where Cooper Kupp was out last year and Puka Nacua got 20 targets in his first game, 15 in his second targets, that was not the case when Kupp was on the field. And it's also worth noting that Cooper Kupp was playing injured for the entirety of last year. Yeah, he was able to play some games, but he was dealing with that injury. Sean McVay recently confirmed this. So don't be surprised if Cooper Kupp goes back to being the wide receiver 1 in Los Angeles, which is largely why I am fading Puka Nacua like crazy this year. So I'm all in on Cooper Kupp. Honestly, think he could go a little bit higher as well. Now is where I start to deviate from DraftKings positioning. For the 3rd pick in the 3rd round, I have Travis Kelce, whereas he's going 29th overall. I have him at 27th. He's a fantastic player, and he's in a great position right now with the uncertainty of if there won't be a Rashee Rice suspension, the fact that Xavier Worthy, their 1st round draft pick, is now missing time with this hamstring injury. Literally his first practice, he got injured. And we've seen how it can affect rookies when they miss large periods prior to the season beginning. That's such an important time for them to work with whatever position group they're working with, but especially when you have to develop that bond between wide receiver, quarterback. And we have Hollywood Brown with the Chiefs now, who he does not have the greatest hands in the world. Okay, he's a step above MVS for sure, but his catch rate usually hovers around 57-58%. I think we're going to see Travis Kelce reestablish himself as the trusted target for Patty Mahomes. And frankly, I think he's going a little late just because people are fading him for political stuff or whatever. And you cannot have that mindset in fantasy football. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat. You should not be fading Travis Kelce. You should not be fading Aaron Rodgers if you have a great opportunity to draft him in an awesome spot. If you want to win, you got to put that stuff away, right? There's certain players, like I get if you don't want to pick up Deshaun Watson, right? If there's certain inalienable things that they have done that really don't mesh with morality and ethos. But as far as this politics game, guys, you got to get over it. You just got to focus on winning. Travis Kelce is a steal in the 3rd round. Let's be honest. Number 4, 28th overall. This is my biggest jump on this chart. I have Josh Allen as the 4th pick in the 3rd round, whereas DraftKings has him as the last pick in the 3rd round. This guy is as consistent as it gets in fantasy football. I mean, he has been the number 1, number 2 quarterback pretty much every year over the last 4 years. And yeah, Stephon Diggs left, but I'm not worried about that. I'll give you a lot of good reasons why I'm not worried about that. Keon Coleman for one, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Chase Claypool, MVS, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox. It's not as though Stephon Diggs is the only person that can catch targets, or Gabriel Davis. I think they're adopting this spread the ball out mentality that we're seeing with some teams like the Packers, the Texans, where there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed, and they're going to bring a big plate, honestly. And we know his capacity as a rushing QB. So there's some quarterbacks that I think are a little too early to pick, that don't really separate themselves from some of those mid-round quarterbacks enough to justify picking them this early. But Josh Allen is absolutely, more so than any quarterback, the one that you can justify picking early. Next up, 5th pick of the 3rd round, 29th overall. He's going 33rd overall for DraftKings. I have DJ Moore. And I'm excited about the passing element of this Bears game. And I really do believe that having some additional weapons to take some of the spotlight off of DJ Moore is going to help him maintain his game and the production that we saw last year. I don't think he's going to eclipse what we saw last year, but I think having that added element of a Keenan Allen, of Rome Odunze, is going to give defenses a little bit more that they have to accommodate for, which will help DJ Moore establish that production that he had last year, which is why he deserves to still be in there right around the 3rd round, middle of the 3rd round. And people have been saying they think there's going to be a big Cole Kmet this year, and I couldn't be more out on that, right? They have a new coordinator. They got rid of Luke Getsy, and who's the coordinator they brought in? Shane Waldron from the Seahawks. This is not a guy that gets tight ends involved very often. When over the last 3 years have you rushed to draft a Seahawks tight end like Noah Fant or Will Dissly? That's not his scheme. That's not his game. So I'm in on DJ Moore with the 5th pick overall in the 3rd round. Next up, I have Devontae Smith, 30th overall. DraftKings has him 28th overall. He had a very strong second half of the season where it kind of seemed as though he honestly may have stolen the spotlight a little bit as the wide receiver 1 with the Eagles. He certainly was the better of the two towards the latter half of last year. They gave him that huge contract, so I think he's a pretty good pickup in the middle of the 3rd round, and don't be surprised if he becomes the more consistent option as opposed to AJ Brown. AJ Brown, I'm sure, will have his huge games, but as far as consistency, I think Devontae Smith is an excellent candidate for that. Depending on your strategy for best ball, you might choose to pick AJ Brown over him if you want a piece of that Eagles offense, just because we know when AJ Brown booms, he booms. But I feel as Devontae Smith is going to be a nice high floor player for you with a couple of weeks where he does boom, which is also why I like him a lot more in redraft leagues as opposed to best ball, but still a good pickup in the 3rd round. Next up, 31st overall, I have Stephon Diggs. He's going 35th overall, and the largest reason that I have him going a little bit earlier is because of the formatting with PPR. I think he's going to be that nice underneath option for CJ Stroud, right? We know Nico Collins is a deep threat. Tank Dell is quite a deep threat as well. I think what Stephon Diggs is going to bring to this offense is a quick move the chain sort of guy who could see a heavy target volume. So if it was standard format, I wouldn't be as in on Stephon Diggs, but for PPR, with the volume that he's likely going to get and the position that he plays in that offense, I'm going to put him a little bit higher than DraftKings did. I'm going to have him at 31 instead of 35. Also worth noting, he knows the severity of this year, right? He didn't get a long-term contract. This is ostensibly a prove-it year for Stephon Diggs, who has been a little tumultuous in the league, a little bit of a drama queen here and there. So for lack of a better term, he knows he needs to be on his best behavior, so to speak, right? He can't have any of these headlines anymore. Him fighting with people in the locker room, complaining about not getting the ball. I think that's going to push him into a better teammate role, so to speak. And I think he's going to elevate his game so that whoever signs him, whether it's the Texans signing him to a long-term contract, but I don't think that's likely going to work with the money that they've handed out to Nico Collins, or another team, he's going to want to have a high-note year this year. Next up, I have Deebo Samuel a little bit lower than where DraftKings has him. I have Deebo Samuel at 32 overall instead of 27th overall like DraftKings. And that's largely just because we know what Deebo's bread and butter is. It's this sort of dual threat situation, rushing and catching. But look at the stats when Christian McCaffrey entered into their team. Deebo's rushing production did drop a good little bit. Matter of fact, he had, I believe it was just as many yards rushing in 12 games that year CMC came in as he did the previous year for a full year, because he had around 365 rushing yards, I believe, the year before, and then we saw that production drop, and then it got just a hair lower this year as well. So taking that element out of his game. Now, what is interesting, of course, is to see what happens with Brandon Ayuk, because the thought process would be that Deebo Samuel would be getting a lot more targets his way. But you also have to factor in Ricky Pearsall, who I think is a steal with where he's going right now. And it did come out that he sustained a very, very minor injury, which is why you see the big red OUT next to his name on DraftKings. But his people have reached out and said that it's a teeny tiny minor injury. And you have to look at where teams are drafting players. And the 49ers spent that first round pick on Ricky Pearsall. It seems as though they were reading the tea leaves a little bit, knew that there was going to be some stuff with Deebo. So you're planning on using that first round draft pick, especially when there were positions that they could have prioritized over wide receiver, but chose to get Ricky Pearsall because it seems as though the writing was on the wall. So don't be surprised if he slides right into that role that Brandon Ayuk played, and we are in a similar spot as it relates to Deebo's production. Next up is Travis Etienne at 33 overall. DraftKings has him at 34. I like Etienne. He's definitely a back who has his huge games and pretty good floor. He will just totally bust occasionally here and there, but if you've neglected the RB position up to this point and you want at least some sort of stability in there with a starter that you can confidently start most weeks, Etienne's a good option there. There are some concerns that Tank Bigsby might have an augmented role this year after a tumultuous rookie year where he didn't do much at all. The Jaguars have said that they believe an extra offseason is going to do some good stuff for Tank Bigsby, but I really don't see him being too much of a threat to Etienne. DK Metcalf I have at 34th overall, where DraftKings has him at 31. I have him sliding back a little bit just because this is an entirely new Seahawks system, and all the stuff coming out of the camp has been the JSN is going to have an elevated role in this offense, so he might really compete with Metcalf for those target shares. So I could see Metcalf having a little bit of a decline this year. Next up, I have Malik Neighbors at 35, whereas DraftKings has him at 30. The pros for Malik Neighbors is that he's coming out of LSU, and we know that those receivers, it's almost like an equivalent of Iowa for tight ends. LSU usually produces NFL-ready wide receivers. The main critique here is that, logically, if you're in on Malik Neighbors, then you also must be confident about Daniel Jones, who has never produced a 1,000-yard wide receiver in his career. So the history does not suggest good things for Malik Neighbors, which is why I'm a little more bearish on him than the average drafter on DraftKings. Lastly, 36th overall, whereas he's going 32 in DraftKings, I have Sam Laporta. My main concern here is that Sam Laporta had an amazing year, especially when it came to touchdowns with those 11 touchdowns. That's a high number that's going to be very, very difficult to reproduce. I don't think he's going to get 11 this year. Still definitely a great tight end, but when you look at some of the tight ends going after him, especially like someone like Trey McBride, who could very well be the second receiving options for the Cardinals, I just think you can get your bang for your buck a little bit later in the draft with that position if you're not picking Travis Kelce. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe. We'll be back all NFL offseason with more fantasy advice. We've also got tons of props on the page for you to check out. And then once the season starts, every single Sunday, we'll be having prop bets on our shorts feed. So make sure you hit that button right below this video so that you subscribe and that you'll get access to all of that.